November 2017. A cold evening in Atlanta, Georgia. A rundown neighborhood on the southwest side, streetlights flickering like a silent warning. Something's wrong here. That night, 26-year-old Marcus James, a black auto mechanic, was working late. He was finishing repairs on an old pickup truck belonging to one of his regular customers, a war veteran. The job was exhausting, but Marcus felt content was saving money for his little sister's college tuition. His hands were greasy, his mind on his diabetic mother. He knew he was doing everything right. Until that night. At 8:43 p.m., shouts echoed from the yard next door. Someone called the police. Armed robbery. 6 minutes later, 3 squad cars flooded the street. Officers jumped out with rifles raised, beams of light cutting through the dark. He's black, tall, wearing a hoodie. The woman's voice trembled in the 911 recording later played in court. Only Marcus wasn't tall. He was average height, in a green work jacket with no hood. But when one officer spotted him near the garage's wetty, holding a flashlight, tools at his feet, it was decided. Hands, on the ground. 3 voices roared at once. I work here, Marcus started to say, but the sentence died in his throat under the weight of swelling hostility. They pinned him to the concrete, face down, cuffed him tight. No Miranda rights. No questions. Neighbors didn't intervene. Some recorded on their phones. One muttered, "They're always causing trouble." A teen whispered, "Should have just run." By the time Marcus was taken to the station, he was charged with armed assault, attempted murder, and burglary. The victim, a 64-year-old white woman, owner of a nearby pharmacy. She claimed a black man broke in, threatened her with a knife, and stole cash. No witnesses, no cameras. The case was built entirely on her words and a vague verbal description. It sounded absurd. But the case moved forward. Marcus sat in a holding cell, 3 days with no lawyer. He didn't know his mother was crying in the precinct hallway, didn't know his sister was left alone at home. He just stared at the wall. "Why are they doing this to me?" he whispered. "Because you were born with the wrong skin," muttered his cellmate. A week later, they assigned him a public defender, an overworked man juggling 137 cases. He barely spoke to Marcus, just nodded and repeated, "If you plead guilty, you'll get less time." "But I'm innocent," Marcus cried out, but his lawyer's eyes were dead with exhaustion. At the first hearing, the prosecution looked polished and ready. The district attorney, a white man in his 40s with a cold smile, began his statement with, "Men like him get away far too often. Today is not that day." The courtroom held its breath. The accusations came rapid fire. He had struck the woman. He had stolen. 2-0. He had hidden in the shadows until police arrived. No one asked where Marcus actually was. No one mentioned he had a garage camera broken for 2 years. No one noticed the oil stains on his hands. The details didn't matter. The picture was painted: black man, night, crime, identification. The judge, an older man with a southern drawl, tried to appear neutral, but it was clear his mind was made up. When Marcus's mother tried to speak to his character, the prosecutor objected. "We're not here to talk about the defendant's good deeds. We're here because he committed violence." That was the first hearing. Then came the second. Then the third. The public didn't know. Marcus wasn't famous, not a politician, just a man caught in the wrong place, with the wrong skin color. But at the fourth hearing, she walked into the courtroom, a woman in her mid-30s, short hair, a firm, confident gaze. Attorney Sarah Mead. A volunteer from an organization that defends the wrongfully accused, she had taken the case at random, replacing a colleague. And within hours of reviewing the file, she felt it in her gut. This case reeked of racial bias. Sarah Mead wasn't new to injustice. She had spent 10 years defending clients who'd been swept into the system simply because they were poor, undocumented, or black. But something about Marcus James's case struck her more deeply than most. Maybe it was the silence in his eyes during their first meeting. Maybe it was how he didn't ask her to save him only to believe him. She started digging. First up, the arrest report. It was thin. The 911 call described a black male, tall, hoodie, aggressive. Marcus was 5'9", in a mechanic's jacket with no hood, and had been covered in grease at the time. No weapons had been found on him. No stolen cash. No blood on his clothes. The victim, Elaine Givens, had a troubled past. A year earlier, she'd filed another police report against a black teen for looking suspicious. That case had been dismissed. Sarah subpoenaed local security footage and began mapping out a timeline. If Marcus had really left his shop and crossed to the pharmacy unnoticed, it would have taken at least 5 minutes. Yet, he was supposedly arrested just 4 minutes after the crime was reported. The timeline didn't match. Meanwhile, the prosecutor pressed on. He built a story layered with fear. This man, he told the jury during pretrial arguments, has a history of working odd jobs, moving in silence, hiding in plain sight. That's what predators do. It was character assassination masked as legal argument. The jury, mostly white, nodded slightly as if soothed by the narrative. A young black man in the audience shook his head in disbelief. The town newspaper ran a story with a photo of Marcus from court handcuffed, expressionless, with a headline that read, "Pharmacy attacker in custody. Local mechanic faces justice." The article didn't mention the lack of evidence. It didn't mention Marcus's clean record, or that he'd never been arrested in his life. Public opinion turned fast. At the diner, white residents shook their heads and whispered, "That neighborhood breeds criminals. I always told my kids not to go near there. Lock him up and be done with it." Marcus's family began receiving threats. Someone sprayed "Go back" on their garage door. His sister, Jasmine, was followed on her way home from school. She stopped wearing her hoodie. She stopped speaking in class. Sarah filed motions to dismiss based on lack of evidence. Each one was denied. She interviewed Marcus's co-worker white men who vouched for his presence in the garage. But under pressure from their boss, they became evasive in court. "We didn't see him every minute," one finally admitted. That was enough to cast doubt. Sarah then got her first break. A convenience store 2 blocks from the crime scene had security footage that the police never reviewed. It had a time-stamped clip, 41 p.m., that showed a tall man in a hoodie sprinting past with something metallic flashing in his hand. The man was at least 6'3". Marcus was already at his garage. She played the clip in court. "That's not my client," Sarah said. The prosecutor leaned in. "You can't even see his face." Sarah replied, "But you claimed my client ran that route. The timestamps prove he couldn't have." Still, the judge remained stoic. The prosecution brought in Elaine Givens to testify. She pointed across the courtroom. "That's him. I'll never forget his eyes." Marcus looked down. Sarah stood up, calm but direct. "Ms. Givens, how far were you from the man who attacked you?" 10 feet. "And you were hit?" "Yes." "And you didn't see a weapon?" "I was too scared." "So, you couldn't describe the weapon?" "It was fast. I just remember, I was afraid." That fear was real, but it wasn't evidence. And yet, in that courtroom, it felt heavier than evidence. That's how racial bias works. It weaponizes fear into truth. Sarah requested a lineup test. It turned out, Elaine had never been asked to identify Marcus in a traditional lineup. Instead, she was shown a single photo the day after the arrest, Marcus's mugshot. Classic confirmation bias. Sarah had seen it before. Police show a traumatized victim a suspect. The brain connects dots it doesn't actually have. Sarah pushed harder. She filed to suppress the identification. The judge denied it. "I'm sorry, Ms. Mead, but the victim's testimony stands," he said. She replied, "Then the court has decided belief is more important than fact." She knew the odds. In Georgia, black defendants are 75% more likely to be wrongfully convicted than white ones, especially when accused of crimes against white victims. The trial moved forward. The prosecution rested its case with a dramatic statement. "This man thought he'd get away with it, but we won't let fear rule us. We will act on truth." Sarah stood. "Then, let's talk about truth." She began slowly, methodically. She presented the footage again, the timeline, the inconsistencies in Elaine's statements, the absence of fingerprints, the co-workers' half-hearted alibis. She looked at the jury, eyes steady. This case was never about what happened. It was about who we're comfortable believing and who we're used to fearing. Marcus sat quietly, trembling. Not from guilt, but from exhaustion. He had spent nearly 4 months in jail, denied bail, awaiting this moment. As closing arguments approached, the courtroom was packed. Half of them wanted to see him rot. The other half, mostly black residents, just hoped for justice, knowing how rare it was. Sarah ended her final argument simply, "If Marcus James were white, would we be here today?" The courtroom was silent, so silent that even the ticking of the old wall clock behind the judge's bench echoed like a drumbeat. Marcus sat at the defense table with his hands folded tightly in his lap. His fingers trembled slightly, not from fear of guilt, knew he hadn't done anything, but from the cold reality that in America, the truth wasn't always enough. The jury had been sent out to deliberate. It had taken them just over 2 hours. Sarah sat beside Marcus, flipping through her closing notes, though she already knew them by heart. She'd done everything she could. She'd exposed the faulty timeline, discredited the coerced identification, and shown footage that clearly contradicted the prosecution's narrative. But still, the courtroom air was heavy with something stronger than reasoned doubt rooted in race. Across the aisle, the prosecutor, John Kramer, paced slowly, exuding confidence. He'd prosecuted dozens of cases like this, and he knew the terrain well. He didn't need airtight evidence. All he needed was fear, a tool the system had sharpened for centuries. The bailiff returned with a nod. The jury had reached a verdict. Everyone stood. Marcus's knees almost buckled, but he caught himself. Sarah placed a hand on his shoulder. "No matter what happens," she whispered, "you didn't do this. Don't forget that." The judge took his seat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," the forewoman said. She was in her late 50s, hair perfectly curled, eyes unreadable. The courtroom held its breath. "On the charge of aggravated assault and robbery, we, the jury, find the defendant, Marcus James." A pause. A cough from the back row. "Not guilty." Gasps. Someone in the front row dropped a notebook. Another person muttered, "No way." Marcus blinked. He didn't move. He didn't smile. It was like his brain needed a moment to translate the words, "not guilty." Sarah leaned in, whispered again, "It's over. You're free." The judge banged his gavel. "Mr. James is released. This court is adjourned." The prosecutor frowned, lips pressed thin. He packed up his briefcase, never looking at Marcus. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Flashbulbs exploded like fireworks. Some shouted questions. "Marcus, how does it feel to be free? Do you blame the system? Are you angry?" Marcus said nothing, not out of spite, but because he hadn't found the words yet. How do you describe the weight of nearly being erased? Instead, Sarah stepped in. "My client is an innocent man. He spent 4 months behind bars because someone decided he looked guilty. This isn't justice, it's damage control." The press printed cautious headlines the next day. "Mechanic acquitted in pharmacy attack?" Questions remain after trial ends. But in some corners of town, the myth had already taken root. "I still think he did it," one local diner owner said. "Just didn't have enough proof. Doesn't mean he's clean." That's what racism does. Even when the truth wins, the stain remains. Marcus tried to return to his old life, but the shop laid him off. Customers didn't feel comfortable anymore. His apartment was tagged with slurs 2 days after the trial. Jasmine, his little sister, asked why people still stared at them on the bus. Marcus wanted to scream, but he didn't. Instead, he met with Sarah again. "I want to sue," he said. "Good," she replied. They filed a civil suit, wrongful arrest, malicious prosecution, emotional distress. They named 2 officers who had pushed the charges without evidence, and the city for its role in failing to vet the case. The city fought back, of course, but Sarah was relentless. In depositions, she exposed the internal emails from detectives. "Looks like we got our guy. Matches the neighborhood and description. Should be enough for Judge Sims." Matches the neighborhood. That phrase would echo through newsrooms later. 2 months later, they reached a settlement. Marcus would receive $250,000. But it wasn't the money he cared about. It was the letter of apology he demanded publicly read by the police chief. "We acknowledge that Mr. Marcus James was wrongfully arrested and prosecuted, and that racial profiling played a role in the investigation. We regret the harm caused." The letter went viral. Activist groups amplified the story. Sarah gave interviews on systemic bias. A documentary team contacted Marcus. But not everyone was listening. In town, the pharmacy put up new signs. Zero tolerance for loitering. The newspaper printed an op-ed titled, "Trust the system, even when it hurts." Marcus began volunteering at a legal clinic Sarah helped run. He spoke to young men like himself, boys, who had been stopped, frisked, questioned for no reason. He told them, "You're not crazy. This stuff is real. But we fight it together." One day, as he was leaving the courthouse, this time not in cuffs, but in a suit and tie, he saw Elaine Givens waiting outside. She looked older than he remembered, tired, maybe regretful. She walked over slowly. "I don't know what to say," she murmured. He didn't make it easy. "You don't have to say anything." "I thought it was you," she whispered. "I was scared." "I know," he said. "That's what they count on." They stood in silence. She left first. That night, Marcus finally cried. Not out of fear or anger, but relief. The kind that only comes when the nightmare ends, but the scars remain. He would carry those scars, but he wasn't alone. Because this time, the truth had fought back and it won.